What numbers do you track with your workouts? Do you look at how much your strength is improving? Are you focused on the scale? Are you looking at your body fat percentage? So often when it comes to quote unquote getting results from your workouts, we try to look at objective data and hard numbers to say, yeah, we're going in the right direction. But unfortunately, the majority of the numbers that the fitness industry leads us to believe are important are actually making people less healthy and more injured. So what numbers should you actually be looking at? On today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, this is exactly what Julie and I will be discussing. We're going to cue the intro song and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Charlie. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to let you know that we recently released a book called The Exercise for Life Method. And if you enjoy the conversations that we have every single week on this podcast, then you are going to love this book. So to pick up a free copy of this book, all you have to do is go to exerciseforlifemethod.com. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we are coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. When it comes to your exercise and when it comes to reasons why people exercise, usually we're looking at results, okay? Whether that is losing 10 pounds, whether that is dropping a certain percentage of body fat, whether that's being able to fit into jeans we haven't been able to for a while. But with that often comes tracking of numbers to make sure we are quote unquote getting the results and progressing and going in the right direction. But unfortunately, the numbers that we often look at when it comes to making sure we are allegedly going in the right direction actually make people worse. And mainstream fitness continues to perpetuate this by trying to get people to focus solely on those numbers. So what numbers should you be considering when you are exercising to make sure that not only is your body functioning better, but your health is improving as well?
Charlie, I love that we're going to talk about this today because I actually used to be a chronic number tracker when I trained my clients. And this topic came up from a real conversation that I just had with a client, and I was telling her about the numbers I used to track and how we did it and all these things, and she said, oh my goodness, I would have hated that.
I remember you had a whole sheet that said what gets measured gets done, or something like that. Something like that. What gets measured gets, progressed, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and so I would track numbers like people's weight, even if they didn't care if they were losing or gaining weight. I would check people's girth measurements. I would check people's body fat. I would track people's weights. Like we would do like a weight testing day once a month. So I would try to track everything. Like I kind of thought that was my job as a trainer, was to track everything. And you might be listening to this and you're like scratching your head thinking, well, isn't that your job? Like you're a trainer, you should be tracking all that stuff. And there are stuff and things that I think we should track, but it's not those things. And the reason why I thought, wow, we really need to talk about this is because if I was your trainer, you came in and said, Julie, I want to exercise to become healthier. I want to be exercising my whole life. I want to keep my strength, my function as I age. I just want to stay as healthy as possible. And then I said, okay. And then I started tracking your weight, your body fat percentage. I would test your weights in the gym, like how much you're lifting, and track it over the months. Wouldn't you start thinking that those things were really important? Like, wow, if Julie's tracking those, like those must be really important. And then you'd probably start analyzing them like, oh, I should try to change that. Or, oh, I have to compete against myself from last month. What gets measured gets highlighted, I think would be a better saying. So I used to have a weight sheet, like a weigh-in sheet, and it says what gets measured gets done, I think is what it said. So that was just saying, if we don't check in on the scale, then how will we know what's changing and what's not changing? And it's a good point, but it also is, hey, if we're taking these numbers every other week, every month or whatever, don't you feel like that makes it start to feel like those numbers are really important?
Absolutely. And, as you're talking, the thought that's coming to my mind is, in a way, it's kind of like school, where if, you're just focused on trying to do really well on the test, getting a high score on the test, well, then you're going to try to manipulate things in order to allow you to get a high score on the test. But getting a high score on the test doesn't mean you actually learned anything. All that means is you got a high score on the test. And so, like you are highlighting, the question really is, well, what changes are we trying to make within our body? What changes are we trying to promote with our exercise? And yeah, some people are trying to lose weight and trying to use exercise to help them do that. And we've covered time and again how exercise is part of being healthy. And when you're healthier, you have a better opportunity to lose weight. But using exercise to lose weight is a really difficult thing to do. And across the board, I don't know anybody that it's actually sustainable for long term. So again, this idea of like, well, I need to keep, hopping on the scale once a week or every other week to kind of check in to make sure I'm going in the right direction. What people say, like, oh, make sure the workouts are working. It's like, well, what do you mean? Of course the workouts are working, because in as much as like they're designed to help you be healthier, and whether your scale weight changes whatsoever, it's really not an indicator of whether or not like the workouts are working, because the principles of the workouts are sound. And so that's really what we want to talk with you about today, and what things you need to be thinking about with your workouts to make sure you're going in the right direction.
So after having this conversation and realizing that my client, who really is an exercise for healther, meaning she wants to exercise merely for the health benefit goals, and for her to say, oh, I'd hate taking all those numbers. She said, I feel like it would be a waste of that time. And I was thinking, you're right. Like, it really is a waste of those 5 minutes. Or if you do a whole session where you're like testing things, that's a whole waste of a session, in my opinion, right now. And I thought, well, if those numbers and tracking that kind of brings importance to those things, and those things aren't important, what is important? What would be important to track to let us know that we are exercising to influence your health? That became the question, because if we're not tracking weight, we're not tracking body composition, we're not tracking a food log, we're not tracking test day in the gym, like testing your weights, how many push-ups can you do or how many sit-ups can you do, what are we tracking to tell us that we're getting healthier or that we're doing the right action steps to become healthy? And the first thing I thought of was, what if there was a calendar or like a check box, and did you exercise today or did you not? Because one of the most potent pieces of exercise in terms of how it can improve the health and function of your body is that you show up and do it consistently. And so that means, what days did you exercise and what days did you not? What we're not tracking is, what one day did you do a hardcore workout once a week? That's not very consistent. What's consistent is, how many days a week are you doing something with exercise?
Hey, Julie, I love that you brought that up, and I love that you're kicking off with that, because really the question is, well, we need to take a step back and understand what variables actually influence somebody's health, and then how that is then indicative of somebody's health. And so if losing weight is not one of those variables, if seeing that somebody does more push-ups is not one of those variables, if somebody's girth measurements changing is not one of those variables, well then, like you're saying, the question we need to ask is, well, what variables actually matter? And when it comes to improving your health with exercise, or as I said in the Exercise for Life method, when it comes to accomplishing the one and only goal of exercise, which is to improve the health and function of your body, consistency is key. And so I love that you brought that up, because the first type of consistency really is this consistency of frequency. How often are you exercising? And so looking at your schedule, looking at your calendar, and knowing that, okay, this week I exercised 3 times. This week I exercised every day. This week I exercised once. Whatever it is for you, knowing that data, now all of a sudden, that's a huge variable that not only is very easy to track, but in all honesty, despite popular belief, is actually really easy to influence and improve.
Absolutely. And just, Charlie, while you're talking about that, I was thinking, how does it change in your mind as we're talking about this? Like if we said, how consistent are you with your frequency? And as we're talking about this, in my head, it's almost like my brain is like refiltering, like, oh, at the top of the list now is how frequently am I exercising? And having confidence that that is so important. How regularly are you showing up to provide this stimulus that we call exercise, this stimulus for health? How often are you showing up to give that to your body? Because you don't get those benefits of exercise when you don't exercise. Like a lot of times people think, well, if I exercise on Tuesday and I get really sore and I don't want to return to exercise till Friday because, I was sore and I should be resting. Well, on the Wednesday and the Thursday, you did not stimulate your body to push it closer to health. It is what it is. So if you valued that Tuesday workout that really killed a workout that could have happened on Wednesday and Thursday, well, then the value was not in consistency of frequency. It was in kind of smashing it out of the park with that one workout. So refilter in your head. Think, how could I return to exercise on a more regular basis than I currently am?
Yes. If your exercise today does not set you up to exercise again tomorrow, something needs to change with how you are exercising today. That's the bottom line. So taking that idea a step further, just looking at your workouts in general and how frequently you're doing them throughout the week, I think the next breakdown from that is looking at, okay, how often am I doing resistance training and how often am I doing aerobic exercise throughout the week? Looking at those two things, right? Because as much as we might like to think, okay, well, I lifted weights once this week, that's enough. Or, I went for one run this week or whatever it is, but, I did something every day. Here's the thing. When it comes to things like improving brain health, when it comes to things like improving the health and function of your muscles, improving the health and function of your joints, even your cardiovascular health, as well as warding off chronic diseases and promoting longevity, there are certain minimums of each of these types of exercise that actually need to be hit throughout your week and done so on a consistent basis in order to get your brain to grow, in order to ward off degeneration, in order to improve your memory. And so just thinking like, well, something is better than nothing. Okay, there's a grain of truth to that, meaning I would rather have you doing something than nothing whatsoever. But if we're looking at numbers that are actually worthwhile to track, we need to start looking at, okay, how frequently throughout your week are you doing your resistance training and how frequently are you doing your aerobic exercise?
Great point, Charlie. Knowing how often are you doing each of these different exercises. And I kind of like how I framed it earlier, where it's like, remember that exercise is a stimulus that pushes your body towards health if you're doing it appropriately. So how often are you exposing yourself to the stimulus of resistance training? And how often are you exposing yourself to the stimulus of cardiovascular activity? Both of these provide unique benefits. And so thinking about how frequently am I doing the resistance training? How frequently am I doing cardio? Am I biased towards one? Am I biased towards the other? What can I do to try to frequently visit both of them? It's a really important thing to ask because a lot of us find one thing and we fall into that, well, I did something. And a lot of us, to be honest, go towards the cardiovascular stuff because a lot of people say it's easier. Like, I just have to put my shoes on and go outside.
Takes less thought.
It takes less thought. It can be kind of mindless. But then there's also a lot of other excuses that take us away from even that. I mean, we live in the Chicagoland area, and for, 6 to 8 months out of the year, everyone says it's too cold to be outside or it's dangerous and icy to be outside. So we really have to be thinking, just because of the weather, just because of my schedule, are these valid enough reasons to compromise your health?
Absolutely. You are right on about that, Julie. Now, the other piece to that puzzle is the reason why we're highlighting resistance training and the reason why we're highlighting aerobic exercise is because if we just look at how many times throughout the week you perceive that you've exercised, you'll say things, well, I did yoga 5 days this week. And then, I lifted weights once and then I did a group class. And here's the thing. This isn't a knock against yoga, but when we're looking at ways of exercising to truly challenge your body and improve your health, it goes beyond just doing different poses. It goes beyond doing, some kind of stretching. Like, you really actually have to challenge your body and specifically challenge your muscles. Now, don't get me wrong. There are ways to go about doing yoga where it can be very intense from that regard. But I think most of the time when people are doing it, they're looking at it as almost like, a relaxing hour or an hour that they just kind of get to zone in on themselves and, just kind of work on their breathing and stuff like that. All that is fine and well, but that can't be the majority of the things that you're doing for your exercise. If you actually want to use your exercise to improve your health, you have to do the resistance training, you have to do the aerobic exercise, and then the yoga and the things like that. That can be included as your recovery work or your mobility days or whatever it is. But we want you to focus on, if we're talking about what's the numbers worth tracking, how frequently throughout your week are you exercising, and what breakdown of that is how frequently are you doing resistance training and how frequently are you doing aerobic exercise?
Absolutely, Charlie. So we are thinking about how frequently am I challenging my body and thinking about the two categories, the resistance training and the aerobic exercise. Now, another number that you might be thinking that you might track, or the fitness industry has made it really easy to track / devices have made it really easy to track, is your steps. And I want to lump into this steppage thing, which is calories. So steps and calories. And just the other week, but really I think it was a few months ago, you guys know I love cycling, and that's a great way for me to get in my aerobic exercise. And at the end of every ride, I do a video. At the end of every ride, it says, "Congratulations, you burned 230 calories." And to be honest, I first look at that and I look, oh, that's like a granola bar right there. Wow, I just did 30 minutes of really hard work for a granola bar. But when they give me that number, it's interesting because it makes me feel like, even though I'm in the field, that number was important. Why else would they give me that number if it wasn't important? So that's a really interesting one. And a lot of workout videos now, a lot of devices now will say, "Congratulations, you completed your workout. That was 50 calories. And they give you that number, which again makes you feel like, oh, is this important?
Yeah, Julie, it's so funny you mentioned that, because that is one that I was thinking as well. Is like this whole calorie idea. Now, look, when I do my, the cycling in the morning as well, I like looking at how many calories I burn, so I can be like, oh yeah, now I can totally justify the number of eggs and bacon that I'm about to eat. But even though it's not comparable, it doesn't really matter. But I like having that in my head. But it's not something that I actively track. It's just, it's pretty much useless data, to be completely honest. So the question is, well, if we're not tracking our calories, because, we want to know how many calories in versus calories out if we're doing weight loss, right? Again, not true. That's a separate thing. But what should you be looking at from an exercise perspective? What should you be tracking from an exercise perspective to help promote your health? And to me, the comparable is not the number of calories, but your effort. What's your perceived effort while you're doing your exercise? Was it a really low effort? Was it a pretty medium effort? Was it really high effort? Now, you can get super detailed with this, and there's a whole RPE 1 to 10 scale, and I think there's maybe even one that goes 1 to 20. I don't know that anybody in the world knows the difference between a 16 effort and a 17 effort out of 20, but I'm sure that there's some wording that can help you figure that out. At the end of the day, really what we're looking at is, was that a relatively easy effort? Was it a more difficult effort? Or was it a harder effort? And honestly, the way that I break this down is I look at an easy effort as around, if I'm wearing a heart rate monitor, around 55% of my maximum heart rate. Or if I'm doing a resistance training workout, it might feel like a 5 out of 10, meaning it's pretty darn easy. Okay. Obviously it's easy. A medium workout might be a 70% of my maximum heart rate or effort, or a 7 out of 10 RPE when I'm doing resistance training. And then a hard workout would be like if I'm getting my heart rate 85% or above of my maximum heart rate. Now, that doesn't mean I sustain that heart rate, but I'm getting up there. So I'm doing intervals, or, when I run, I'm often at that level. Or when I'm doing resistance training, like I'm pushing myself to the point where I feel like I maybe have a rep or two, or I don't have any more reps left in the tank with every set. And so the reason why that's important is because the thing that actually changes your health with exercise is not the doing of it, meaning it's not the calorie burn of it. It's the challenge of it. So the more challenging it is, the more opportunity it has to improve your health, so long as it's appropriate for your body.
I love that you brought that up, Charlie. And I want to break down a few things that Charlie said because it was so good. And sometimes if you're unfamiliar with these words, it can be overwhelmingly technical. So sometimes people rate how intense something is by like a heart rate monitor. It's like a monitor, goes on your chest, or some of us have it on our wristbands. It tells us like how fast is your heart beating. So like the faster it beats, the harder the work was, which is cool. I mean, it's just interesting data. The other way that is harder to track, but if you do it consistently enough, you'll get good at it, but is like when you weight train, sometimes your heart rate doesn't skyrocket. But that doesn't mean that you're not working hard. Because if you're doing the chest press or the leg press or bicep curls, how challenged are those areas? And it might not be a total body challenge. Like if you're sitting on the chest press, I hope your chest is really working and your legs are really not. So your heart rate's probably not going to go up as high as if you were doing like cycling or jogging. It's just a different type of challenge. And so we're looking for how to change your body is how challenged is your body. So if it's an aerobic event, well, that might mean that you can track your heart rate and it gives you some kind of sense of feedback of how challenging it was. If you're doing weight training, it's going to be harder to track it with a heart rate monitor because of the variances that happen during weight training. But it is your responsibility as the exerciser to say, hey, how tough was that on my biceps? That doesn't mean rip your biceps to shreds every time you work out. We're not saying that. But we are saying that you do have to challenge them. Because I do notice that a lot of times when people aren't exercising for performance, like it's not your passion and life mission to exercise, and it's also not something that you love doing, and it's not like you're training for a 5K or a bodybuilding competition, then we kind of think, oh, well, I don't want to work out like that, so I'm going to work out with the light weights. That's not what we want to see either. We need to see appropriate stimulus. So when you're thinking about exercise, making sure that it's challenging to your body and appropriately challenging. I want to share a little story that I recently experienced because I just thought it was interesting, and I hope you can learn a little bit from this. And if you don't know, I recently had a baby 8 months ago, and all the way up until my son was born, I was working out on the bike 3 times a week. I weight trained 2 to 3 times a week. I was very active. I was like, I got to stay strong as long as possible. And then I had a baby, which was an extreme physical event. And then you're recovering from having a baby and you're caring for a newborn. So I wasn't exercising consistently. I also wasn't sleeping well. I probably wasn't eating as well as I could. All the things that you do when you're like literally sleep deprived and just lounging on the couch because you have to. You're recovering. Anyways, when I got back on the bike after taking, 8 weeks to 3 months off, I remember I was cycling, and when I was pregnant, I remember always thinking, oh, I want to get myself to a goal of this many beats per minute. If I can hit that at least once a ride, then that's going to be...
For your heart rate.
For my heart rate. Yeah. If I can hit that once a ride, then that's going to be like good effort. That's going to be, I know that's high for me and I can push it to get there, and then great. I remember when I first got back on the bike, I was moderately riding thinking, wow, I am out of breath. This is hard work. And I look and my heart rate is at that goal heart rate where I used to have an aim for. And so what's interesting was, given my current state, that was tough for me. And I want to invite you to give yourself permission to allow quote unquote easier days to be tough. You have to be adjusting, even if it's not a 2 month or 3 month gap. You can come in, you can work out one day and then go get your flu vaccine. And then your body is struggling for a few days, but it still means you should work out. It just means make it appropriate. Or you can work out one day and then you sleep poorly, or you eat poorly, or you have Thanksgiving and you eat dairy, and that makes your body go crazy when you eat dairy. And so now your body, this is what it is we live this life of constant adjustments, and you need to be adjusting your workouts. Don't be skipping out on them. Most people want to skip out on them when they feel like they can't be 100%. But any circumstance, any acute thing like a weird meal or a weird night of sleep, or a big thing like, you just went through a really big stressful move, or a big, really stressful labor and delivery, or whatever it is that takes you away from exercise. Make sure you're constantly adjusting your exercise to be appropriate for your body, because that is one of the hugest things that'll keep you returning to your exercise. But also making sure that it's appropriately challenging. That's what we were trying to bring this back to. And challenging for you one day can be different for another day. And it's not about competing with your past self.
That is so true. Now, the last number that we want to bring up that often gets tracked and promoted by the fitness industry, that in our opinion is about one nudge above worthless, is the number of steps that you take throughout the day. And Julie alluded to this earlier, and it's super easy to track. There are so many wearable devices. Your phone even tracks it throughout the day if you have your phone in your pocket, or if you're like me and you don't have your phone in your pocket, and then you see that, oh, you took 500 steps today. It's like, no, I didn't. I just wasn't wearing you all day. So here's the thing, is there's this idea out there that 10,000 steps is some mystery goal that needs to be hit by all in order to prove to yourself that you have been active throughout the day. And the truth of the matter is that how people go about tracking their steps is not only inaccurate, it provides very little information. And what I mean by that is the way most people go about tracking their steps is they'll wear their wearable for their workout. And you think, well, yeah, like I'm trying to see like how active I am throughout the day. So of course, like I'm going to wear my watch during my run to track my steps. Here's the thing. The number of steps you get during your run doesn't matter. What matters is how active you're being when you're not working out. That's really the value of tracking your steps. And so the whole idea of like, okay, well, I'm 500 steps short and I'm about to go to bed, so I'm going to march in place while I'm brushing my teeth in order to hit my steps. It's like, yeah, no, you already missed it. That's not the point. The point is not to close your rings for the day. The point is to stay active consistently and intermittently throughout your day. So instead of looking at the number of steps that you get every day, what we would encourage you to track is how often you are getting up and moving for 3 to 5 minutes or even upwards of 10 minutes throughout the day. Okay. A minimum of 3 bouts of 10 minutes needs to be done every single day. And this is what we kind of talk about when we talk about all the time exercise. But standing up and moving for 3 to 5 minutes more frequently throughout your day has huge health benefits from the standpoint of preventing and reversing insulin resistance. And that's really where the value of getting steps in comes in.
Absolutely, Charlie. I have so many good examples of this, but my favorite things that you just said was how active are you being when you're not working out? I almost wish a handful of my clients that wore the active bands would take them off when they exercised, because a lot of them will be like, oh, I only got 2,000 steps today. Good thing we're here for the workout. I hope we do a lot of running today. Or when I used to wear one, whenever I would do weight training, it never tracked a lot of steps. Well, because I was weight training, I was sitting on machines, I would walk between machines, but still that's not a lot of steps. And so then I would feel like, well, now I have to go running or I have to get on the treadmill and walk just to make up for the steps, because the steps is what I was valuing. What I wasn't valuing was I moving throughout the day, which steps can give you some kind of input or influence over that. And secondly, was I doing my special event exercise? Now, a couple examples of this that I think highlight like the differences. If you are wearing a step tracker and you wear it all day and you only get 1,000 steps a day, that's usually a pretty good indicator that you're pretty inactive, because most of us get around the world by walking. But there are so many ways to move that are not step related. In fact, in our One Workout Away challenge, we do a daily movement bit where we give people movement to do multiple times a day that has no steps involved, but that would still count as like your movement throughout the day. Really use the step counter for what it is. The goal is not to complete the 10,000. The goal is not to close your rings. Remember, the reason that it's there is to keep you moving throughout your day and to say, I've had an active day. And so if you've had an active day but wasn't step related, great. Good for you. That's what you were trying to do. The goal wasn't the steps in the first place. Now, there is one cool thing about the step tracker device thingies that I have enjoyed, but you actually have to do it, is one of them, which I can't remember which one, will buzz at you if you haven't moved for like an hour. That one is cool because it's like a reminder. It's saying, hey, you've been doing nothing physically for the last hour. Maybe you're at your desk, maybe you're driving or whatever. That one is cool because it's a reminder, hey, get up, move. You know, you got to change your position. You got to get your blood flowing. That is actually an encouraging message for the all the time exercise, which is really good for combating chronic disease. So if you do have that one, that's great. But it's also not an invite to get up and start sprinting laps. And I mean, maybe that feels good for you, but it doesn't matter if you stepped or you stood up and, you know, moved your arms up and down, or you did, if you're in the One Workout Away Challenge, the daily groove. That's just a reminder like, hey, get up and do something.
So when it comes to tracking your numbers from an exercise perspective, a lot of times we get focused on weight or body fat percentage or girth measurements or how many reps of something we're doing, how many push-ups we can do, how many pull-ups we can do. None of that truly matters. What we recommend you looking at are 3 numbers. 1, how frequently throughout your week you are exercising, specifically how frequently you're doing resistance training and how frequently you're doing aerobic exercise. Number 2, how challenging does your exercise feel? Is it a low challenge, a medium challenge, or a high challenge? And number 3, how often are you getting up and moving throughout your day? Making sure to move intermittently throughout your day is a key component to preventing and reversing insulin resistance. So making sure that you are getting up and moving intermittently and consistently throughout your day is a key number to track. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know whose sole focus when they're working out is to improve their numbers, whether that is getting more gains in strength or getting more gains in muscle mass or whatever? Share this episode with them so they can hear about some other takes on things that they should be considering showing improvement for their health from their workouts as opposed to just their gym gains. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
Hey, and let's make your gym gains of health.
So how'd you like that episode? Did you find the information useful? If you enjoyed what we discussed today, then you are going to love the Exercise for Life Method, which is a book that we just put out and you can get a free copy of by going to exerciseforlifemethod.com. All we ask is that you pay for shipping and handling, so head there now and get your free copy as well as some exclusive bonuses that you will get instant access to when you get the book. You can learn more and get your copy at exerciseforlifemethod.com. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.